Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was around 11:45 p.m. when the Pizza Hut in rural Ohio started to feel unsettlingly quiet. The dinner rush had ended, and the few workers left were preparing to close. Among them was Jessica, a 22-year-old college student working her second job. She'd done dozens of closing shifts before, but that night something about the silence pressed against her chest, like a weight. The store was small, built off a highway that barely saw any cars after 10. The parking lot lights flickered from age, casting shadows that seemed to move. Inside, the neon open sign buzzed faintly while Jessica mopped near the back ovens. The air was thick with the smell of cheese, grease, and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Her coworker, Danny, was in the walk-in freezer counting inventory. He'd been gone longer than usual, but Jessica didn't think much of it until she heard a sharp, muffled bang from inside the freezer door. She froze, mop in hand. Then came a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across metal. "Danny?" she called, her voice shaky. No answer. She walked over, the rubber soles of her shoes squeaking. The cold air hissed as she cracked the freezer door open, her breath fogging the air. "Danny, what are you?" She stopped. The freezer light was off, though it was supposed to stay on when the door opened. All she could see was a faint shape. Something slumped near the back. She squinted and reached for the switch. When the light flickered on, she saw it clearly. Danny was on the floor, his face pale blue, his eyes wide open. But what made her stomach twist wasn't the look on his face. It was the handprints on the frosted walls. Long, smeared streaks of red. She screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a box of dough. Her shaking hands reached for her phone, but before she could dial, she heard another sound, this one from the front of the store. The door chime. Someone had walked in. Jessica's panic froze her in place. No cars had pulled up. No sound of an engine, no footsteps outside. Just the faint squeak of the front door closing. She peered down the dim hallway and saw a figure standing near the counter, a man in a Pizza Hut uniform she didn't recognize. His name tag was smeared, but she could make out one thing. It was upside down. "Sorry, we're closed," she managed to say, stepping back. The man didn't move. His uniform looked wrong, old, faded, like it hadn't been washed in years. His hat was tilted low, and when he finally looked up, she saw his face was grayish, waxy, like something half frozen. "I used to close here too," he said, his voice hoarse and broken. "They never let me leave." Jessica bolted toward the back door, her shoes slipping on the wet floor. She didn't dare look behind her, but she could hear his footsteps, soft dragging, following her. She reached the back exit, slammed her shoulder into it, and ran into the night air. The parking lot was empty except for her car under the flickering light. She dove in, locked the doors, and tried to start it. The engine sputtered once, twice, then went dead. Her eyes darted to the store's windows. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then she saw him standing behind the glass, watching her. Still, silent. When the police arrived 40 minutes later, they found Jessica unconscious in her car. The back door of the Pizza Hut was wide open, but no one else was there. Danny's body was found frozen solid in the walk-in, but his cause of death didn't make sense. His lungs were filled with air as if he'd been frozen alive, but the temperature in the freezer wasn't nearly low enough to do that. The restaurant shut down a week later. Workers claimed the lights would turn on by themselves, ovens preheating at midnight, and an unseen voice whispering from the freezer, "Don't close yet." Years later, when the building reopened as a small diner, the new owner found a dusty, yellowed Pizza Hut name tag in the vent system. The name was hard to read, but you could still make out one thing. It was upside down.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 2.
There's a Pizza Hut in southern Ohio that locals refuse to order from after dark. It used to be one of those 24-hour locations off the highway with the neon red roof sign glowing through the night. I worked there in 2018 doing the late night cleanup shifts. What happened during my final week there still wakes me up sweating. We always closed at 2 a.m., but one night, around 1:40, the front door chime went off. No one was supposed to be there. The lights in the dining area were off, just the kitchen lamps flickering through the glass. I looked out and saw a woman standing at the counter. Her clothes looked soaked, like she'd walked through a storm, but it hadn't rained in days. She kept her head tilted down, hair dripping onto the tile. I told her we were closed, but she didn't move. I was about to call my manager when she whispered, "He's still in the freezer." Her voice was dry and cracked, like her throat hadn't worked in years. Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked out into the dark parking lot. I ran to the window, but there was no car, no footprints, nothing, just the sound of the roof vent humming. My coworker, Tyler, came back from taking out trash and asked who I was talking to. When I told him, he froze, his face drained of color. He told me a story I'd never heard before, about a delivery driver who went missing in the 90s after getting locked inside the walk-in freezer. They found him 3 days later, still standing, eyes open, frozen solid against the metal shelves. Management replaced the freezer but never mentioned it again. I laughed it off, tried to focus on closing duties. Around 2:30, Tyler left, but I stayed behind to finish mopping. That's when I heard a knocking sound. Soft, rhythmic, it was coming from the back. I followed it to the freezer door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. My hands were shaking when I grabbed the handle, half expecting a prank. But when I opened it, cold air rolled out, thick and heavy. The inside lights were off, but I could see frost patterns forming on the walls, shapes that looked like handprints. My mop bucket slid across the floor by itself, hitting the freezer door with a clang that made me jump, and then I heard a voice from inside, muffled, almost pleading. "Please, let me out." I ran out the back door and waited in my car until sunrise. When I finally told the morning manager what happened, she didn't say a word, just looked at me for a long time, then opened a drawer under the register. Inside was an old employee badge, cracked, faded, and still coated in frost. The name on it was the same as the missing driver's. That Pizza Hut shut down 2 months later. The building's still there, boarded up, the red roof peeling. But at night, truckers swear the sign still flickers on, glowing red against the dark. And if you listen close enough, you can still hear someone knocking from inside the freezer.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 3.
There's a small Pizza Hut in rural Kentucky that locals still whisper about. It's been closed for years now. The building boarded up, the red roof faded to a dull brown. But back in 2003, it was a busy place, especially on weekends when families would come in for the buffet. The story that shut it down came from one night in late October when the night crew was preparing to close. The manager, Todd, was doing his last rounds after 11 p.m. The dining area was empty, chairs stacked, and the smell of old grease hung in the air. Only 2 employees were left, a dishwasher named Kevin and a delivery driver, Maria, who was counting her tips near the register. Todd was in the walk-in freezer checking inventory when he heard Kevin shouting from the kitchen. It wasn't a normal "hey boss" shout, it was a panic scream that cut through the hum of the freezers. When Todd ran out, Kevin was pale, pointing at the prep table. A single pizza sat there, half-cooked, crust burned, toppings melted into a black smear. "Did you put that there?" Kevin stammered. Todd said no. Nobody had turned the oven on for nearly an hour. Maria swore it hadn't been there moments earlier. Then all 3 of them heard it, the ding of the oven timer. The oven door was closed, heat rising from it, but nobody had started it. Todd tried to brush it off as a prank. He opened the oven, empty. Then the timer dinged again, even though the door was still open. Maria backed toward the door and muttered that she was leaving. That's when they all heard it. Faint from inside the freezer, someone whispering. It wasn't clear words, more like a long breath of speech through teeth. Kevin thought it sounded like someone saying, "It's not done." Todd grabbed a flashlight and opened the freezer door. The light flickered as the cold air poured out. Inside, frost coated the metal shelves, and in the back corner, there was a shape. Not a person exactly, but something crouched low, like a shadow had depth. Todd's flashlight dimmed, then died completely. He slammed the door shut and locked it from the outside. When the police were called later that night, they found the freezer door open again. The latch hadn't been broken, it was simply unlocked from the inside. Kevin quit the next morning, refusing to go back. Maria moved 2 towns over and stopped answering calls. Todd stayed for a few weeks longer, but said the smell started getting worse. Not like rot, but like burning cheese and hair mixed together. The ovens would sometimes turn on by themselves, and he swore he saw handprints in the flour on the prep counter that were too small to belong to any of them. He finally quit when he came in one morning to find every pizza box in the store open and stacked neatly in the shape of a cross on the floor. The security cameras didn't show anyone entering overnight, only static and flickers movement when the lights went out around 2:13 a.m. The store was shut down 2 weeks later. Corporate said it was due to electrical and sanitation issues. Locals, though, still talk about the night the ovens turned on by themselves and the smell of burning never went away. Some delivery drivers passing by at night swear they still see a faint orange glow through the cracks in the boards. And if you listen close enough, you can still hear that timer ding. Over and over.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 4.
There was a small Pizza Hut off Highway 19 in rural Kentucky that everyone in town knew about, but few went to after dark. It looked like any other restaurant. Bright red roof, flickering neon sign, but locals whispered that strange things happened there after closing. The staff would joke about the place being haunted, until one night in 2014, the jokes stopped. A delivery driver named Corey worked the late shift. It was slow that night, storm clouds hanging low, thunder rolling in the distance. Around 11:30 p.m., just before closing, the manager, Lisa, told Corey to take one last delivery. The ticket was odd. No phone number, no online order receipt. Just a handwritten note taped to the counter with an address outside town, down a road that wasn't even on Google Maps. Lisa swore she didn't write it, but the order was logged into the system, marked paid in cash. Corey didn't think much of it. He loaded the pizza into his car and drove out, rain beginning to pour. The GPS didn't recognize the address, but he followed the old country road until it turned into gravel, then dirt. Finally, the headlights caught sight of a mailbox. No house number, just a rusted H carved into it. He parked, grabbed the pizza, and stepped out. There was no sound except the rain hitting the trees. Then, faintly, he saw a light flickering deeper in the woods. Thinking it must be the house, he followed it. He walked for maybe 5 minutes before realizing how far from the road he'd gone. The light ahead seemed to sway, like a lantern. When he finally reached it, he found an old, half-collapsed cabin. The light was coming from inside. He called out, "Pizza Hut delivery!" But no one answered. The front door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of mold. The walls were covered in what looked like children's drawings, all scrawled in red crayon, pictures of a man standing in front of a Pizza Hut with something dark dripping from his hands. On the broken table in the middle of the room sat a Pizza Hut box, old, faded, like it had been there for years. It was still sealed. Corey froze. The order he was holding had the exact same label, same handwriting. He felt a vibration in his pocket, his phone. The screen lit up with a message, "Order completed. Please return to the store." He turned to leave but stopped. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor, his and someone else's, leading toward him. He bolted out of the cabin, sprinting through the woods toward the road. When he finally reached his car, the passenger door was open. The pizza box he'd been carrying was gone. The car smelled faintly of pepperoni and something metallic. He drove straight back to Pizza Hut, heart pounding. But when he got there, the lights were off, the doors locked, and his own car wasn't in the parking lot. It was like he'd never left. The next morning, police found Corey's car abandoned near the woods. The pizza was still inside, cold, untouched, with a single bite mark on the crust. The bite was too large to be human. Lisa quit the next day and moved out of town. That Pizza Hut closed for renovations a month later, but it never reopened. Locals say you can still see the red roof glowing faintly from the highway at night, even though the building was torn down years ago. And sometimes, delivery drivers passing through still get ghost orders on their tablets, addresses that don't exist, with one note attached, paid in cash.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 5.
There used to be a small Pizza Hut on the edge of town, tucked between an old pawn shop and a gas station that was always half lit. It had that greasy, familiar smell that comforted most people, until you noticed how off it felt after midnight. I used to work there on the closing shift back in 2017. At first, it was easy money: sweep floors, prep dough, mop the lobby, lock up. But the store had a strange rule: never go into the walk-in freezer alone after 11 p.m. I thought it was a joke. The manager, Steve, told me it was some insurance thing after an accident years ago. But the older employees would get quiet whenever the topic came up. One night, we were short-staffed and behind on prep. Steve was in the back office doing inventory, and I needed more pepperoni from the freezer. I hesitated, but the rush was coming soon. I grabbed my jacket and went in alone. The air hit me hard, freezing, sharp, but with this smell under the cold, something like wet cardboard and raw meat left too long. The overhead light flickered weakly, and the humming of the compressor filled the silence. I grabbed a box from the shelf and turned to leave, but the door didn't budge. It wasn't locked, just stuck. I pulled harder, then banged, but nothing. Then faintly, I heard something behind me. A shuffle. I turned around fast, heart pounding. The shelves stretched down the narrow aisle, and for a second, I saw movement at the far end, a shadow slipping between the racks. I called out, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. No answer. I took a step forward, and the light buzzed louder. That's when I noticed the frost forming along the floor, spreading from under one of the lower shelves. Steam-like breath rose from the space between the racks. Then I heard it, a wet, dragging sound, like meat being pulled across tiles. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath thick in the air. Something was crawling, slow and deliberate, just out of sight. I backed up toward the door, banging again. Steve yelled from outside, but his voice was muffled. I could barely make it out over the hum, which was now more like a low, guttural moan from the freezer itself. A hand slammed against the glass window from the inside of the door, my side. But it wasn't mine. The fingers were blackened, frostbitten, and bent wrong. The skin cracked as it pressed against the window. I stumbled back, slipped, and hit the floor. The shadow behind the shelves was moving closer now, the scraping louder, faster. I screamed for Steve, and then suddenly, the door burst open. Warm air hit me. Steve grabbed me by the collar and yanked me out. I turned around, but the light inside had stopped flickering. The freezer looked normal. Nothing there but the shelves and food. Steve's face was pale. He didn't even ask what happened. He just said quietly, "You went in after 11, didn't you?" After that, they changed the closing schedule so no one ever went in alone again. A few weeks later, the store closed down. They said it was for renovations, but it never reopened. Years later, I ran into Steve at another job. I asked him what really happened. He hesitated, then said, "Back in 2003, one of the workers got locked in that freezer overnight. They didn't find him until the morning. The compressor failed halfway through, but his body, it was frozen solid, like he'd been in there for days." He looked at me and said, "The worst part? When they pulled him out, the door wasn't broken. It wasn't even locked. I don't eat at Pizza Hut anymore. But every time I pass one after dark, I swear I can hear that low humming sound, like something waiting behind the freezer door, still trying to get out."